Okay, so hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Default Global. This is where we connect with global first entrepreneurs and remote work experts from all around the world. Our guest today is Liam Martin, co-organizer at Running Remote and co-founder at Time Doctor. Liam, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Liam, with your impressive background as a founder of Time Doctor and running the largest remote work conference in the world, could you please introduce yourself and share some insights into your journey in the remote workspace?
Sure. So my name's Lee Martin, as you said before. I'm a human being currently located in Montreal, Canada, behind this
Okay.
brick wall. And I have been working remotely for almost 20 years. TimeDoctor.com, running remote, and then also Staff.com. It's actually an enterprise product that we have. Time Doctor and Staff.com are time tracking for remote workers, and Running Remote is the largest conference on building and scaling remote teams. We actually
Yeah.
just wrapped our previous one in Lisbon, Portugal, a week ago, which was amazing. We had 1,000 attendees come, both virtual and in person, and it was talks about everything and anything you could think about with regards to building and scaling remote organizations. And I myself am a lover of remote work. I've been doing it for 20 years. We have team members in 33 different countries all over the world. And my business partner is actually located in Sydney, Australia. So we're almost on opposite sides of the planet. And we've been working that way for almost 15 years.
Okay, sounds good. And like you said, the fifth Running Remote conference took place just last week in Lisbon, right? So there were around 50 speakers, I guess, right? So with this extensive experience in remote work, global hiring, so with such an incredible lineup, what would you say was the most, I guess, insightful thing you learned from those guys this year?
I think it was that there's a switch that's starting to happen. So there's a move.
Switch. Okay.
There's a pendulum. The pendulum is moving in the other direction, and I think we all need to be able to decide as a community: are we going to go back to the office, or are we going to continue on with opening up Pandora's box a little bit more and embracing remote work? And so there is I would definitely say, hyper aggressive, leaning on conspiratorial pushback to the office. And because of that, this Running Remote was more important than any other event that we've previously run, because in my perspective, we have to make a decision as a community. Do we educate people that remote work is a more productive, less stressful way to be able to operate your business? Or do we simply not give people that information and have everyone return back to the office? It is incredibly frustrating for me to be able to see 26 studies were published in 2021 on the impact of productivity for remote work. And 26 out of 27 of them stated that remote workers were more productive than their on-premise counterparts.
Okay.
But everyone's going back to the office. And there are lots of arguments that it's better for culture. It's more important to be able to educate people, training. None of these things matter. And the data is very clear that working remotely is a more effective way to be able to operate your business. And yet everyone is still returning to the office. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. And just your point of view, your prediction on this, So your prediction about the future work, global hiring, do we see like this, like you said, that everyone would just simply go back to office, or there will be some segment of companies like I don't know, some geek-oriented companies who will just stay in the remote workspace, or just
Sure.
It will be just tell me your thoughts on this.
So pre-pandemic, February of 2020, 4% of the US workforce was working remotely. And by March of 2020, it was 45% of the US workforce. That's the biggest shift in work since the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution took 80 years, and we did that in March. So a complete transformation of everything we can think about with regards to labor, socialization, intercommunication, politics. All of these things were reset in a very short amount of time. We're now at approximately 26% of the US workforce working remotely. and the majority of those people are working in a hybrid work solution.
Mm-hmm.
So there has been a significant pushback to the office. There are a few little inklings of hope that we could stop and reverse this trend. But my perspective is that corporate America has made their decision that everyone should be going back to the office because they just are not convinced that the work is being done. There's no
Mm-hmm.
accountability measures built into the actual implementation of this remote work. And if you really want to touch on the third rail of remote work that no one really talks about, it's not
Mm-hmm.
about culture. It's not about education. It's about accountability. It's about someone saying, hey, I need to know that they are doing the work that they are supposed to be doing. And there are ways to be able to measure that. But in a 20th century management philosophy that requires presence in an office, it's just not going to work with that model. So you have a bunch of managers that are built on old school methodologies for measuring performance when there are much better measurements in place. And that's the big piece that I think we need to solve, or we are going to be basically back to where we were pre-pandemic in the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In one of your podcasts, you talked about this, that this next wave of this remote work we'll see from this corporate America way, right? So wave. So you're saying right now that it's not going to happen. So in the next couple years, right?
Yes, I mean, I'm very concerned that we're going to backtrack to where we were before.
Okay, got it, got it. Okay, let's talk a bit about another topic. I guess you touched this on your conference, and I guess you had a couple speakers who talked about this. I'm talking about like a legal framework for remote workers, right? So can you share maybe your thoughts on changes in the legal frameworks surrounding remote workers? Because we see like those companies like Deal, yeah, Oyster, like Remote, Velocity Global, and a bunch of other companies who are just growing, and who are employer of record providers. But there are also a bunch of guys or experts who are saying that it's not really legal, to do what those guys are providing in terms of their service. For example, hiring through contracting, right? So they're trying
Mhm.
to hide this evidence that it's not a contractor, but it's not an employee, but it's in fact it's a contractor. So, and it's not very legal. I mean, and I see this from I hear this from different experts. So, what is your opinion on this? We'll see any changes. We'll see some extra regulations, or vice versa. Maybe there will be less regulations in this space. What do you think?
I think it's an evolving space. You're absolutely right. The line between contractor, employee, do you actually work through an EOR? Do you set up your own subsidiary in a particular country? It's a decision that every single company needs to make. And I think there's a ton of different variables that work into it. If you thought that HR in one country was difficult,
Hmm.
try HR in 33. It's almost impossible. So
Right.
you need to be able to recognize the definition of a contractor in Nigeria is very different from the definition of a contractor in Ukraine or in Canada or in the United States.
Yeah.
And so those things need to adapt and evolve dependent upon the situation that you're in. EORs provide a really good cover for that. And it's a fantastic solution to just say, I've solved it from an EOR perspective. However, I actually think it's a lot more complicated than that. We had Bridget from You Can Book Me that spoke at the Running Remote conference, and she
Hmm.
has, I believe, 100 employees located in 18 different countries. And she
Okay.
broke down every single country, whether she has a contractor relationship, whether she has a subsidiary, or whether she works through an EOR, because she
Hmm.
actually used a mix of all three
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
be able to solve that problem. So it's a lot more gray than anyone would really recognize. And when you really speak to these companies, they actually are building much more complicated hiring structures than just hiring an EOR and it's over, or everyone's a contractor and it's all over. It's unfortunately a lot more complicated than that,
Yeah.
particularly actually wherever your corporation is based out of. That would be, if you're thinking right now, man, this is the first time that I've heard about an EOR, employer of record, and I'm kind of terrified. You should be
Hmm.
to a
Hmm.
certain degree. And the first thing that you can do to be able to protect yourself as much as possible is wherever your corporation is based out of, hopefully all the executives are located in that same country, or at least they travel into that country to be able to make executive level decisions. And all of the employees in that particular country are employees. So that's the
Mm-hmm.
most important first step that I would make from a pragmatics perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and then start to look at where are our large subsidiaries, where are people that might be doing executive level activities, as an example, which also doesn't just impact your payroll, but also impacts your corporate tax. Because if there's an executive that's making decisions in another country, then that country may actually be able to go after your corporation for corporate tax. So you
Mm-hmm.
need to take all those things in consideration. It's very complicated. We have a lot of content on that on our YouTube channel because all of our
Mm-hmm.
talks are up there for free. But if you type in employer of record running remote, we have a very in-depth video that reviews all of those implications.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sounds good. And speaking about your own company, what method do you have of hiring? You do you use in your own company? Are you hiring like contractors, or you work through this employee of record companies, or it really depends on country?
It really depends on the country. So we're very old school because we started before any of these EORs really
Mm-hmm.
existed. So we've set up quite a few subsidiaries,
Mm-hmm.
and that provides its own set of problems. So every subsidiary that you add, if you want to get acquired as a company, you need to do separate form of due diligence on every single subsidiary that you own.
Right.
So if you own a UK subsidiary, as an example, you need to identify, is someone suing you in the United Kingdom? What are the implications towards the EU? What are the implications towards the United Kingdom legal frameworks?
Mm-hmm.
All of these things need to be taken into consideration. So if I was going to redo it today, I would say I would set up either in the United States, or I would set up somewhere like the UAE. Very
Mm-hmm.
easy structure to be able to set up. Everyone that is located in that particular country would be employees. And then wherever I had people that were doing significant amounts of either executive activity or people that were committing towards the code base, because I run a software company, they would be located in those particular locations, either under subsidiaries or under an EOR that has a first party uh, corporation in that particular country. So that's another
Mm-hmm.
big piece of the pie that you have to take into consideration is there are EORs that work through third party organizations.
Mm-hmm.
You actually want an EOR that works through a first party organization. And I think right now there's a real battle for which EOR ends up having a complete first party organization set up. I
All right.
don't think there is one now. I think there is a mad dash to be able to get to the finish line, to be able to say, actually, if you hire through us, we will personally take all the legal responsibility, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily these third party groups, which essentially doesn't provide you that much protection at all.
Mm-hmm.
Not to necessarily get too nerdy on EORs, but I could go on for days about it.
Okay, okay. And as a software company, right? Like you said, I believe most of your teammates are developers, software engineers, right? So with that, just have a question in terms of when you need to hire someone, what criteria you have do you have in mind? I mean, when you're choosing the specific country where you're going to hire someone, is it some time zone criteria, or is it like a this amount of engineers you can find in a specific country, or there's something else?
So the biggest implication that we have for hiring engineers or anyone else, and this is
Hmm.
actually reviewed in the book that we wrote
Okay.
about 7 months ago, is we run on something called asynchronous management, which is the
Okay.
ability to be able to manage people without directly interacting with them synchronously. So we're talking synchronously, but the people that are listening to this
Yeah.
podcast are consuming this
Yep.
information asynchronously. And they can comment on a YouTube video, as an example, if you posted
Hmm.
this on YouTube, and we would be able to respond to them asynchronously.
Hmm.
So because we've implemented an asynchronous management model inside of our organization, we don't care where people come from. and we actually try to remove those variables inside of our HR process and our recruitment process so that
Hmm.
we are as open to all countries as we
Okay.
possibly can be. And that's why we're located in 33 different countries,
Okay.
because we just look for the best talent. So we identify, we have an engineer, maybe let's say that engineer's salary is 60,000 US. Where is the best person on planet Earth to be able to get a $60,000 developer? It's probably not in San Francisco because we're priced out of that market.
Hmm.
Um, Eastern Europe, fantastic place. If I were actually to specifically redirect people that were location specific, I would say Eastern Europe is the best location for engineers.
Hmm.
Then I would say the next best area is India. Then I would
Okay.
say the third best area is probably the Philippines. However, a
Okay.
lot of those people are quite junior level devs. I would also take a look at Africa, which is really blowing up right now. Someone that came to the Running Remote conference
What
is a
about
company
Latin
called
America?
Entella. Latin America is also a really good spot, but I would say it is developing at this
Hmm.
point, and I don't see as much throughput from Latin America in comparison to Eastern Europe, as an example. And that's
Hmm.
also not taking into consideration if you just want to make it rain and you don't care about the cost of engineers at
Hmm.
all and you just want the top 1%,
Right.
San Francisco is the best place.
Okay. Yeah. Can imagine.
But
Okay.
that rarely, by the way, is actually the most effective way to be able to deploy your capital. If you've if you're venture backed and you've raised $200 million, absolutely go for the top 1% of developers because that might give you a 3 month advantage over your competitors. But fundamentally, if you're a bootstrap company like we are, it's much more important to be able to be more cost effective. And I think the most cost effective market in terms of return on investment would be Eastern Europe for engineers at this point.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. And again, talking about your company, I did some research, and it seems that Time Doctor is known for its powerful features that empower its employees and promote autonomy, right? So, but I'm just curious, how do you think this striking the right balance between monitoring and trust is important, for remote teams, right? And how can Time Doctor help companies achieve that balance? Because, I mean, on the one hand, I have this, you should trust your people, right? On the other hand, you should, monitor them, right? And just this,
Right.
the thing here, just to find this balance. I'm just curious, how do you do this?
My general perspective is trust but verify. So
Mm-hmm.
I do it in a couple ways. Most importantly, this is actually why everyone's going back to the office. This is
Mm-hmm.
the thing that people don't really talk about is when you look at corporate America, they think if they're in the office, they're working. They're not actually working when they're in the office. They're playing Candy Crush and everything else
Right.
just as much as they would back home. It's just that you've added a commute inside
Mm-hmm.
of that interaction and
Mm-hmm.
that feedback loop. So having accountability inside of remote work is absolutely critical, just as much as you have accountability inside of the office. Building that autonomy versus trust is a really interesting seesaw effect that you have to kind of balance between these two groups. And what I would suggest that people do, which is what we do inside of our organization, is everyone uses Time Doctor inside of our company. And
Okay.
everyone can actually see everyone else's data. So everyone
Oh.
knows that I'm on
Okay.
default global right now if they wanted
Okay.
to look. And they
Okay.
can measure how long was I on Notion? How long was I on SteamYard? How long was I on Gmail? I actually spent about 30 seconds jumping onto Zoom because I thought this was a Zoom call. And
Mm-hmm.
then I can analyze that in comparison with the other 556 podcasts that I've
Mm-hmm.
done because I'm currently working on the podcast task.
Mm-hmm.
And I can analyze that data and directly apply the ROAS, the return on ad spend, essentially, of that versus all the other activities that I do inside of my job. And I recognize that podcasts are one of the highest leverage activities that I can do in my current role inside of the company because let's say 10,000 people are able to listen to this
Mm-hmm.
podcast and they can expand out, and anyone that listens to me for 45 minutes
Okay.
is a really good return on investment. So everyone is collecting that same information and everyone is equal. And in that type of environment, you have absolutely no resistance in terms of basically team members thinking, oh, well, do you trust me? Well, I do trust you, but do you trust me? That's the big
Mm-hmm.
question that really has to be put forward. And when you have a dynamic where you have a manager or an executive that
Okay.
you don't see their data, and then you have an employee that does, that's where you create a dislocation
Mm-hmm.
between these two different power structures. But if everyone has access to everyone else's data, that is where the real magic happens. We have, I believe it's in chapter 7 of the Running Remote book, we talk about the mindset of radical transparency throughout the entire organization. And that's an aspect of that. So if you can give everyone the same informational advantage as the CEO of the company,
Mm-hmm.
give them access to the P&L, give them access to time doctor data, give them access to financials, give them access to all the project management systems.
Okay.
If everyone in the company has the same advantage as the CEO in terms of information, they end
Mm-hmm.
up making really great decisions and they become very autonomous very quickly and much more effective. It's a challenge for a lot of CEOs to be able to allow their employees to have access to that information. But I am telling you, once you actually give that information over, you free yourself to actually become a hyper productive organization, which most remote first companies are.
Okay, that's a very good insight, in fact, and it is something that we are in my company. We're also thinking about, to implement, and like you said, like we should trust, but at the same time, we should have the tools to monitor what our team is doing, but not from micromanagement perspective, I guess, but from perspective where we can see some gaps and help them, to do their job better, So, for example, we see this that they spend a lot of time on this task. Okay, so they spend 40% of their time on this one. So probably how can we automate this? How we can improve this? Without this information, without this monitoring, I mean, we simply do not know that they spend like a 40% of their time on that specific task, and we don't know that we need to automate this and improve this. So yeah, I totally agree with you on
It's
this.
also more of a coaching issue too.
Yeah.
So how can you use this tool? My vision for the future of our industry is there will be an AI assistant, which Time Doctor is the closest to actually doing this. We do it in some certain contexts.
Yeah.
There's an AI assistant that works throughout your workday, and at the end of the day, it will say, Liam, you did 3 podcasts, you did 2 other meetings, and you answered emails for 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
We've actually identified that you should be spending more time answering emails because that's an information gap that you're currently developing. And because of it, 3 other team members weren't actually able to complete their tasks because you dropped the ball in the chain sequence of all of these types of activities. Or I'm answering tickets all day long as a support agent. And do you know that this is something that we already implement inside of Time Doctor? Do
Mm-hmm.
you know that the average high NPS customer support rep actually jumps onto Zoom 1 out of 10 calls, and you're jumping onto Zoom one out of 30 calls or 1 out of 30 tickets? So you
Mm-hmm.
need to actually increase the amount of time that you're jumping onto video calls with clients
Mm-hmm.
because that has a strong correlation towards you having a lot more
Mm-hmm.
success
Mm-hmm.
in boosting
Mm-hmm.
NPS. This is simple
Mm-hmm.
stuff that, well, maybe it's not simple. It's complicated stuff that we implement all the time, but then it becomes a coaching issue where
Yeah.
we want to be able to make sure that we're coaching those particular individuals to be the best selves that they possibly can be. And that doesn't necessarily mean working longer. In the vast majority of cases, it means working smarter, which means working less.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a good one. So I mean, we're planning to implement something like this. So probably we should take a look at your feature that
Give it
you're
a
going to
try,
launch. Yeah.
and I'd be happy to bring you through the process, and we could jump on in the
Okay.
future, and you could tell me
Sounds
how it
good.
went.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, so and probably my last question for today, just based on your experience and knowledge, what are the top 3 recommendations would you offer to companies who are new to this global hiring and remote work? So what 3 things they should consider before starting all this?
Well, I mean, number one, it's go to the Running Remote conference. Number
Okay.
two, it's buying the Running Remote book, which
Okay.
is got all of. I'm kidding, obviously. I would probably say the first thing that you need to be able to take into consideration is recognize that it's not about whether or not you use Zoom or Google Meet or whether you use Slack or Microsoft Teams.
Mm-hmm.
It's an actual managerial switch. So, managing remotely is the first thing that you need to learn. My personal belief is that asynchronous management is the operating system for remote work.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at the most successful remote first companies, the vast majority of them operate on an asynchronous management model so
Mm-hmm.
that everyone can get access to that information. You're not time boxed in a particular 9 to 5 or having to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to jump on for a meeting. All that information is available to you when you want to consume it. And it's
Mm-hmm.
a big managerial shift. But if you can execute on that, it is actually going to move your company forward faster than anything that I could possibly tell you with regards to
Okay.
whether you should use Zoom or Notion or Trello or Asana or
Mm-hmm.
all
Mm-hmm.
of these tools are actually redundant to the core managerial switch that you need to be able to make. Once that's done, really and fundamentally a core piece of it is process documentation.
Mm-hmm.
So getting everything that you do inside of the company and writing it down, which is one of the core pieces of asynchronous management, getting all that information, digitizing it, putting it on a platform so you can access it whenever you want. There's two really great tools that I would suggest: Almanac and Slight.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two fantastic tools to be able to implement. And if you can run those tools inside of your organization where anyone can basically query any process inside of the company,
Mm-hmm.
then the platform becomes the manager instead of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
So the platform is where you go to get answers, not Liam, who's your manager, who
Yeah.
may be asleep because it's 3 o'clock in the morning for him and he actually can't answer your question.
Mm-hmm.
The third piece would be really making sure once you've implemented those two key pieces, asynchronous management and process documentation, is allowing for everyone the space to be able to do their best work. So we have a personal philosophy that we should be empowering everyone on planet Earth to work wherever they want, whenever they want. Having not just schedule flexibility, but location flexibility really unlocks the next level up with regards to remote work. So if you've done those first two, that's where you're going to open yourself up to a workforce that are literally the top 1% of all workers on planet Earth, because those are the people that are saying, I want to be location independent and work remotely. If you can adapt to that type of model, you will have a rocket ship of a company.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay, I guess we're good. So thanks a lot, Liam, for sharing your insights on global hiring, on remote work, on the future of this industry. So thanks a lot. We wish you good luck and take care. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.